So you are using this term, computational propaganda. What is it about? Is that already a science term?
So the term computational propaganda, the way we use it is basically when it's the kind of where algorithms and software meet social media. So what computational propaganda does is it distributes misinformation across social media. That's how we understand it.
How do you distinguish between propaganda, fake news, junk news? What's the difference there?
Yes, so we don't use the term fake news really. We use junk news. I suppose fake news has really become a bit of a catch-all term for lots of different things. It's even been used by politicians to discredit legitimate journalism, but critical journalism. So junk news, I think, really encapsulates that sort of hyper-partisan, very propagandist, overly emotional content that we're really researching. So we go with junk news. Also because a lot of junk news we've found isn't necessarily completely untrue. It's just very, very biased in some way.
Why exactly propaganda?
So we're interested in how public opinion is manipulated over social media. So how propaganda is distributed over social media to influence public opinion and then ultimately perhaps even influence elections.
So what are exactly your findings? What campaigns and what elections have you been researching, and what did you get to know?
The ones we have produced was one about the US election. We did 3 on the US election actually, so there's quite a lot of reading there. Then we did 2 on the French election, round 1 and round 2 of the French election. And we also did the German presidential elections. We're in the US state of Michigan, a real battleground state during the election. And what we found is that junk news and real news or legitimate news from professional news organizations were shared at a ratio of 1-to-1. So basically people were sharing just as much junk news as they were sharing news from professional news organizations.
You were also your group was also researching the French elections. Yes. What's interesting in there?
We found that there was a lot more traffic about Macron than there was about Le Pen, which was quite an interesting finding there. But actually the percentage of junk news shared during the French election was quite low. I believe it was at around 5 to 7%, which compares, obviously in Michigan it was almost 25% of the content shared was junk news, and in Germany it was something around 10%.
Is there a clear understanding in your group how actually do these botnets operate? What's the algorithm? Who creates? Who controls?
One of the things that our group does is they interview bot writers all over the world. It seems to be a variety of individuals that tend to write these bots, not always for financial gain. There are different motivations behind writing bots, but there's also, and this again is just something that I'm aware of, it's not something that I've done specific research on, but when it comes to large botnets, so effectively armies of bots, there are big underground marketplaces. The way we define political bots is they operate over social media platforms and they seek to really influence public opinion. So they might be interacting with people, they might be retweeting content, and yeah, they're the ones that we're most concerned with.
What is really there that can really manipulate people's opinions? So do you think it's just the mere fact that many people, users, for example Twitter users, they don't differentiate between junk news and real news? What's the way to manipulate someone's opinion?
You know, the more something is retweeted, the more it's liked, the more legitimate it seems, the more mainstream it seems. So basically the way that this sort of computational propaganda works is it tries to make information look more grassroots. So that's how they do it. What they're actually doing is they're megaphoning this information. You know, it's artificial, it's not real people that are liking this post or sharing this post. It's fake accounts or bot accounts, or it's all automated. So they're trying to make very marginal views look more mainstream. which is problematic. I guess the real solution, I think, or one of the solutions, would be to make people more aware of this phenomenon of misinformation. The more conscious people become of these things being shared and how to verify whether something is legitimate or not, the less of a problem it will be. But like you say, you know, on the one hand, yes, you have to talk about it and you have to share it, and mainstream media has to sort of contribute to this conversation and deconstruct it. Will that mean that this news becomes more popular and people believe it? I hope not. I hope people will say, oh yes, this is ridiculous.
Social media became very toxic for the past 2, maybe 3 years. Of course, there's a certain context to what is happening in Ukrainian segment of Facebook, and in Ukraine itself we have a war, we have complicated political situation, and there is a lot of resentment. This is why people may, you know, the opinions are different and there are a lot of fights and discussions, things like that. But is there something else that makes social media so toxic, so aggressive?
Yeah, I think it's something that we have to consider. I mean, in general, the pace of technological change and how people have adapted to it is a really interesting problem that needs to be explored further. It's interesting what you say about Facebook in the Ukraine, because that to me is something quite new. It might just be because obviously every one of us has a different Facebook feed, so it really, you know, your perspectives might be completely different to someone else's. And I think the recent elections really exposed that, because you think that public opinion is perhaps behind or you know, in favour of one thing, and then the election goes the other way and you're thinking, why did that happen? Well, you realise that your feed was completely different, and you know, you didn't really have much an idea what people were actually talking about.